Tycoon abandoned his wife, leaving her in poverty with their 3 children. Maya, Lucas, Sophie, breakfast is ready, she called out, her voice carrying up the stairs of their suburban home. 12-year-old Maya was the first to appear, her long dark hair neatly braided, already wearing her school uniform. Mom, Sophie's struggling with her shoes again, she reported, sliding into her usual seat at the kitchen table. Sarah sighed softly, a mixture of pride and sadness washing over her, as she watched her eldest daughter naturally taking on a caretaker role. I'll help her in a minute, sweetheart. Can you make sure Lucas doesn't forget his science project? 8-year-old Lucas thundered down the stairs, his backpack half open and his tie askew. Mom, I can't find my project folder. His eyes were wide with panic, a trait he'd inherited from his father. It's on the coffee table where you left it last night, Sarah replied, already heading upstairs to help her youngest. She found 4-year-old Sophie sitting on her bed, tiny fingers struggling with her shoelaces, her bottom lip trembling with frustration. Mommy, they won't listen to me, she said, her voice small and defeated. Sarah knelt before her daughter, her heart squeezing at the sight. Here, baby, let mommy help. As she tied the laces, she hummed softly, the same lullaby she'd sung to all 3 children since they were infants. Looking at Sophie's face, a perfect blend of her own features and James's, Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest. Her children were her world, each one carrying pieces of their father in their mannerisms, their smiles, their struggles. Maya's determination, Lucas's quick mind, Sophie's charm, all echoes of the man who had once been the center of their family. There we go, all ready for preschool, Sarah announced, forcing brightness into her voice. She scooped Sophie up, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and innocence. Downstairs, the kitchen was a symphony of ordinary morning chaos, spoons clinking against cereal bowls, Maya helping Lucas organize his backpack, the coffee maker gurgling its last drops. It was a scene of perfect imperfection, a snapshot of family life that Sarah had always treasured. As she watched her children eat breakfast, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, changing. If only she had known then that these ordinary moments would soon become precious memories of their life before everything fell apart. Mom, Maya said suddenly, looking up from her toast, are you okay? You look sad. Sarah quickly wiped away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about how lucky I am to have you 3. The morning sun continued to stream through the window, illuminating the floating dust particles like tiny stars, as Sarah Chan and her 3 children shared another breakfast together, unaware that their world was about to shatter into a million pieces. The grand ballroom of the Renaissance Hotel sparkled with promise that evening. James Wong stood at the altar, his tailored suit impeccable, his eyes fixed on Sarah as she walked down the aisle. The successful real estate developer and the art gallery curator, everyone said they were the perfect match. You look absolutely breathtaking, he had whispered when she reached him, his dark eyes swimming with tears of joy. The memory shifted to their first home, a modest starter house that James promised would be the first step toward their empire. Baby, imagine it, he'd said, spinning her around the empty living room. In 5 years, we'll be in a mansion. In 10 years, we'll have properties across the country. I'll give you the world, Sarah Chin. She'd believed him. God, how she'd believed him. Late nights at the office turned into missed dinners. Missed dinners became missed weekends. It's all for us, he'd insist, his voice tired but excited over the phone. Every deal, every contract. It's building our future. The children came, and with them, James's ambition grew exponentially. Each success fueled his hunger for more. Sarah watched as the warm, passionate man she married transformed into someone else. Someone whose eyes glazed over with dollar signs, and whose touch grew colder with each passing year. James, please, Sarah had begged one evening, finding him in his home office at 3 a.m. Maya's piano recital was today. She kept looking at the empty seat beside me. He hadn't even looked up from his laptop. I'll make it up to her. This deal could set us up for life, Sarah. Don't you understand what I'm trying to build here? The memory of their last real conversation pierced through her like a knife. It was just 3 months ago in this very kitchen. "What happened to us, James?" she'd asked, her voice barely a whisper. "When did numbers in a bank account become more important than the look in your daughter's eyes when you miss another birthday?" He'd finally looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time in years. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she'd married, vulnerable, present, real. But then his phone buzzed, and the wall came back up. "I have a meeting," he'd said, straightening his tie. "We'll talk about this later." They never did. A small tug on her sleeve jolted Sarah back to the present. Sophie stood there, sticky fingers and worried eyes. "Mommy, you're crying." Sarah quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. "Just some soap in my eyes, sweetie." She glanced at the clock. 8:15 a.m. "Come on, we need to get you all to school." As she ushered her children toward the door, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about today. The air felt heavier, charged with an electricity she couldn't explain. If she'd known then what she knows now, she might have held them a little longer, hugged them a little tighter, before stepping out into what would become the last normal morning of their lives. The sound of her phone ringing cut through the air, a number she didn't recognize. Her hand hesitated over the screen, her heart suddenly racing with inexplicable dread. "Mrs. Wong? This is Richard from First National Bank." The voice was professionally detached. "We've noticed some unusual activity on your joint accounts that requires immediate attention." The world seemed to slow down as Sarah stood in her driveway, watching her children climb into the car. "What kind of unusual activity?" "There have been several large transfers made in the early hours of this morning. Given the amounts involved, we wanted to verify." Sarah's throat tightened. "How large?" The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like eternity. "Mrs. Wong, all of your joint accounts have been emptied. The transactions were authorized using Mr. Wong's credentials." The ground beneath her feet seemed to sway. Maya's voice called from the car. "Mom, we're going to be late." I need to check something," Sarah managed, her voice hollow. "Can you hold the transfers?" "I'm afraid the transactions have already been completed. The funds were transferred to overseas accounts." Sarah's fingers went numb, her phone nearly slipping from her grasp. With mechanical movements, she got into the driver's seat, her mind racing. James had been distant lately, more than usual. Last night, he'd kissed Sophie's forehead while she slept, something he hadn't done in months. He'd lingered in Maya's doorway, watching her read. He'd ruffled Lucas's hair at dinner. He'd been saying goodbye. "Mom," Maya's voice cut through her thoughts. "Your hands are shaking." Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing a smile into the rearview mirror. "Just a little too much coffee, sweetie." The drive to school was a blur. Sarah's mind kept replaying signs she should have seen. The late-night phone calls in whispered Mandarin, the mysterious business trips that grew more frequent, the way he'd insisted on maintaining separate personal accounts alongside their joint ones. After dropping the children off, Sarah raced home, her heart pounding against her ribs. James's car wasn't in the driveway, not unusual for a Thursday morning, but something felt different, wrong. The house was silent as she entered, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Up the stairs, down the hallway to their bedroom, each step feeling like lead. The closet door stood open. His side was empty. Not just the clothes, everything. Every suit, every tie, every pair of shoes. Even the vintage cufflinks his father had given him on their wedding day. On his nightstand lay a single envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it, unfolding the crisp paper inside. "Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't do this anymore, the pressure, the expectations, the responsibility. I found another way, another life. Don't try to find me. Don't try to understand. Take care of the kids." The paper slipped from her fingers as her knees gave way. She sank to the floor, her back against the bed they'd shared for 7 years. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting shadows across the half-empty room, as Sarah Chen's world crumbled around her. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time it was their mortgage company, and then the credit card company. and then their investment broker. With each call, the true magnitude of James's betrayal began to unfold. Like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "You've reached James Wong. Please leave a..." She hurled the phone across the room, watching it bounce off the leather chair he used to sit in during their late-night conversations about their future. Those dreams now felt like cruel jokes. A soft knock at the door. "Mom." Maya's voice was small, uncertain. "We're home. The bus dropped us off." Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. "Come in, sweetheart." Maya entered, still in her school uniform, holding Sophie's hand while Lucas trailed behind them. The sight of their innocent faces made Sarah's heart splinter even further. "Where's Dad?" Lucas asked, his eyes scanning the room. "His car wasn't outside when we got home." Sarah patted the space beside her on the couch. "Come here, all of you. We need to talk." They gathered around her, Sophie climbing into her lap, Maya perching on the armrest, Lucas cross-legged on the floor. The weight of what she had to tell them pressed down on her chest like a stone. "Your father..." Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Your father has decided to go away for a while, like his business trips?" Sophie asked innocently, playing with Sarah's necklace, the last birthday gift James had given her. "No, baby. Not like his business trips." Sarah stroked Sophie's hair, searching for words that wouldn't shatter their world completely. "He's made some choices that mean he won't be coming home." Maya's body stiffened beside her. At 12, she was old enough to read between the lines. "He left us, didn't he?" Her voice was flat, controlled, so much like James when he was hiding pain. Lucas jumped up, his face reddening. "No, Dad wouldn't do that. He promised to come to my science fair next week." "He promised." "Sometimes," Sarah began, her throat tight, "people break promises, even when they shouldn't. Even when those promises are the most important ones they've ever made." Sophie looked up, her small face scrunched in confusion. "But Daddy said he loved us. In my bedtime story yesterday, he said love is forever." The innocence in her daughter's voice broke something inside Sarah. She pulled Sophie closer, breathing in her baby shampoo scent, trying to find strength. "I want to call him," Lucas demanded, reaching for Sarah's phone. "He'll explain. He'll come back." Maya caught his arm, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Stop it, Lucas. He's not coming back. He's like Tommy's dad in my class. He's gone." The room fell silent except for Lucas's ragged breathing and Sophie's small whimpers as she began to understand something was very wrong. Sarah looked at her children, these beautiful, innocent souls who didn't deserve this betrayal, and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. "Listen to me," she said, her voice stronger now. "What your father did, it's not about you. Any of you. You are perfect, wonderful, amazing children. This is about him and his choices. We're going to get through this together." "But how?" Maya whispered, finally letting her tears fall. "How will we?" A loud knock at the front door made them all jump. Sarah's heart raced. Could it be James? Had he changed his mind? Through the window, she saw a man in a suit holding a briefcase. "Maya, take Sophie and Lucas upstairs, please." As her children reluctantly climbed the stairs, Sarah straightened her shoulders and walked to the door, each step feeling like she was walking toward another blow to their already fractured world. "Mrs. Wong, may I come in? There are some urgent matters we need to discuss." The living room felt smaller as Mr. Harrison spread documents across their coffee table. The same table where James had helped Lucas with his homework just days ago. "Mrs. Wong, I'm afraid the situation is more severe than initially reported," he began, his voice clinically detached. "Our investigation has revealed systematic withdrawals over the past 3 months. Your joint accounts, investment portfolios, and your children's college funds. They're all gone." The room started spinning. The college funds? But those were in trust accounts. Mr. Wong had power of attorney. He liquidated everything at 3 a.m. this morning. Mr. Harrison paused, adjusting his glasses. "There's more. The mortgage payments for the last 4 months were never made. From upstairs came the muffled sound of Sophie singing her favorite lullaby, the one James used to sing to her. The innocent sound against this backdrop of betrayal made Sarah's chest tighten. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I saw him make those payments. He showed me the confirmations. Falsified documents, Mrs. Wong. We've found evidence of extensive financial manipulation." A crash from upstairs made them both jump. "Mom!" Maya's panicked voice called out. Lucas locked himself in Dad's office. Sarah raced upstairs, leaving Mr. Harrison mid-sentence. She found Lucas had somehow picked the lock to James's private office, the one room in the house that had always been off-limits. "Lucas, honey, please open the door. He has to come back." Lucas's voice was thick with tears. "All his stuff is still here. His computer, The sound of drawers being yanked open and papers flying filled the air. Maya stood beside Sarah, her face pale. "Mom, what's happening downstairs? I heard the man talking about money." Sophie appeared in her doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from James. "Mommy, I'm scared." The sound of breaking glass came from inside the office. "Lucas!" Sarah pounded on the door. "Open this door right now." When the door finally swung open, the scene inside stole Sarah's breath. Papers littered the floor like snow. Lucas stood in the middle of the chaos, holding a shattered picture frame, their last family photo from Christmas. But it was what lay scattered across James's desk that made Sarah's blood run cold. Dozens of passport photos of James with different names, bank statements from accounts she'd never seen, and a half-burned document with an address in Shanghai. "Mom!" Maya's voice cracked as she picked up one of the passport photos. "Why does Dad have different names?" Before Sarah could answer, Mr. Harrison appeared behind them. "Mrs. Wong, there's something else you need to know. Your husband, he didn't act alone. We've found evidence of a larger conspiracy involving several of his business partners, and..." Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown international number. With shaking hands, she opened it. "Don't look for me. By the time you read this, I'll be somewhere you'll never find me. The children deserve better than what I could give them. Forget me." The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor as the full weight of James's betrayal crashed over her like a tidal wave. In that moment, standing in his destroyed office with their devastated children and a stranger delivering more bad news, Sarah realized this wasn't just abandonment. It was the calculated destruction of everything they'd built together. "Mommy?" Sophie tugged at her sleeve, tears streaming down her face. "When is Daddy coming home?" The question hung in the air like a knife, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, illuminating the scattered evidence of their shattered life. Mrs. Wong, Mr. Patterson, their lawyer of 7 years, looked aged by a decade overnight. "I'm afraid there's no gentle way to say this. The house isn't just mortgaged. It's mortgaged 3 times over. 3 times. Sarah's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "How is that even possible?" "Fraudulent documentation. James," he paused, catching himself. "Mr. Wong created multiple shell companies. Each one took out a mortgage on the property. The money was funneled through various offshore accounts." Sarah stared at the documents, numbers swimming before her eyes. "And the beach house in California? Sold 6 months ago. The proceeds were transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. The room seemed to shrink. The children's private school tuition, never paid for this semester. The receipts you were shown were falsified." Each revelation felt like another nail in the coffin of her former life. The lawyer continued reading from a seemingly endless list of debts and liens. "The total amount owed, including penalties and interest, comes to approximately..." He adjusted his glasses. $4.7 million. Sarah's laugh was hollow, bordering on hysterical. "4.7 million? We never even had that much." He leveraged everything, Sarah. The house, the cars, even the life insurance policies. He borrowed against assets you didn't know existed and some that never existed at all. A knock at the office door interrupted them. Mr. Patterson's secretary entered with a thick manila envelope. "This just arrived by courier." this marked urgent. Inside were more documents, credit card statements Sarah had never seen, loans taken out in both their names, and a final cruel discovery. James had emptied Sophie's medical trust fund, the one set up by his parents for their granddaughter's ongoing care. The medical fund? Sarah's voice cracked. Sophie's appointments, her therapy. How could he? Her phone buzzed the school. With trembling fingers, she answered. Mrs. Wong? This is Mrs. Henderson from Brighton Academy. I'm calling about the children's enrollment. Sarah closed her eyes, knowing what was coming. Yes, I'm afraid without the tuition payment, we cannot continue to... Please, Sarah interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. Just give me until the end of the week. They've already lost their father. Don't make them lose their school too. After ending the call, she looked up to find Mr. Patterson watching her with sympathy. Sarah, there's one more thing you need to know. He pulled out another document. The IRS has flagged several years of tax returns. They're launching an investigation into potential tax fraud. The room started spinning. Tax fraud, mortgages, debt, medical bills, school tuition. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. What do I do? The question came out as a broken whisper. How do I protect my children from this? Mr. Patterson leaned forward, his face grave. You have options, but none of them are easy. We need to act fast before the creditors. His voice faded into background noise as Sarah's phone lit up with a text message. It was Maya. Mom, Sophie's school nurse called. She had another anxiety attack. They need you to come get her. Lucas won't stop crying in class. Please come. Sarah stood abruptly, gathering her purse with shaking hands. Her children needed her. Everything else, the debt, the fraud, the betrayal, would have to wait. I have to go, she said, cutting off Mr. Patterson mid-sentence. My children need me. As she rushed out of the office, the weight of James's betrayal followed her like a shadow, each step taking her further from the life she thought she had and closer to an uncertain future she never wanted. Sophie's face was tear-stained, her small body trembling as she clutched her inhaler. Lucas sat in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest, while Maya stood guard over them both, trying to be strong despite the fear evident in her eyes. I want Daddy, Sophie whimpered as Sarah gathered her into her arms. He always makes the scary feelings go away. Lucas's head snapped up, his voice bitter beyond his 8 years. Well, he's not coming back. He lied to us. He lied about everything. Lucas, please, Maya pleaded, but her brother was already storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The school counselor, Ms. Rivera, appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Wong, could we speak privately? Sarah kissed Sophie's forehead. Maya, can you stay with your sister for a moment? In the hallway, Ms. Rivera's expression was grave. The children are exhibiting severe signs of trauma. Lucas had an outburst in class today, through his Father's Day project across the room. Maya's teachers report she's completely withdrawn, and Sophie's anxiety attacks are becoming more frequent. Sarah leaned against the wall, feeling its coolness against her forehead. I don't know how to fix this. They need professional help, Mrs. Wong. All of them. And from what I understand about the situation, Ms. Rivera hesitated. The school's resources may no longer be available to them. A muffled sob from the nurse's office caught their attention. Through the window, Sarah could see Sophie crying into Maya's shoulder while her eldest daughter stared blankly ahead, tears silently streaming down her face. They were supposed to have everything, Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Ms. Rivera. He promised them everything. The sound of running footsteps made them turn. Lucas was sprinting down the hallway, clutching something in his hands. Mom! Mom! Look! He thrust his phone toward her, his eyes wild with hope. Dad's credit card still works. I found it in his drawer and tried to buy something online and it worked. That means he's still out there, right? He hasn't forgotten us. The cruel reality of what this meant hit Sarah like a physical blow. Another credit card. Another debt. Another lie. Oh, baby, She pulled Lucas into her arms as he finally broke down, his small body shaking with sobs. He said he'd teach me to play golf this summer. Lucas cried into her shoulder. He said we'd go camping. He promised, Mom. He promised. Maya appeared in the doorway, holding Sophie's hand. We don't need his promises anymore, she said, her voice hard. We have each other. But Sophie pulled away from her sister, running to Lucas and their mother. I drew him a picture, she said, her voice small and broken. Can we mail it to him? Maybe if he sees how much we miss him. Sarah gathered all three of her children into her arms, right there in the school hallway, as their collective grief poured out in waves. Other students passed by. Teachers pretended not to stare. But Sarah could only focus on the three broken hearts beating against her own. Listen to me, she said, pulling back to look at each of their faces. What your father did. It's not because any of you weren't enough. You are all more than enough. You are perfect and wonderful and so loved. But not by him, Lucas said bitterly. Then that's his loss, Maya responded, her young face set with determination. We don't need someone who doesn't want us. Sophie looked up at her mother, her eyes wide and innocent. Mommy, will the scary feelings ever go away? Sarah stroked her youngest daughter's hair, fighting back her own tears. They'll get easier to carry, baby. Promise. And this promise? This one won't be broken. As they walked out of the school together, Sarah realized that the hardest part of James's betrayal wasn't the missing money or the mounting debt. It was watching their children try to make sense of a senseless abandonment, trying to understand why they weren't enough to make their father stay. The foreclosure notice is non-negotiable, Mrs. Wong. The banks are giving you 30 days to vacate the property. Sarah's fingers traced the wall where height marks tracked her children's growth. 30 days? But it's the middle of the school term. My daughter Sophie, she needs to be close to her therapy center. I understand this is difficult, the agent said, her voice softening. But given the circumstances of the multiple mortgages and unpaid liens, a loud thud from upstairs interrupted them. Sarah found Maya in her room, angrily throwing books into a cardboard box. I hate him, Maya declared, tears streaming down her face. I hate him for making us leave our home. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, picking up a fallen photo album. Maya, this is my room, Mom. My friends are here. My school is here. My whole life is here. Maya collapsed onto her bed, clutching her pillow. Where are we even going to go? Before Sarah could answer, Lucas appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Are we going to be homeless? No, sweetheart. We're not going to be homeless. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, even as uncertainty gnawed at her insides. We're just going to have to make some changes. Like what? Lucas asked, his voice small. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing them the listing she'd been looking at all morning. There's a small apartment across town. It's different from what we're used to, but an apartment? Maya sat up, horrified. But what about my piano? What about our backyard? Where will Sophie play? As if summoned by her name, Sophie wandered in, dragging her favorite blanket. Mommy, Mrs. Jenkins next door said we're poor now. Are we poor? The innocent question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Sarah gathered her children close, breathing in their familiar scents, trying to find the right words. We're rich in the ways that matter most, she finally said. We have each other. We have our health. We have... Don't, Maya interrupted, pulling away. Don't try to make this okay. It's not okay. None of this is okay. A knock at the front door echoed through the house. Sarah found two men in suits waiting outside, holding clipboards. Mrs. Wong? We're here to begin the asset inventory for the bankruptcy proceedings. Sarah quickly closed the door behind her, stepping onto the porch. Please not today. My children are trying to process the move. Can't this wait? I'm afraid not, ma'am. We need to document everything before... Their voices faded into background noise as Sarah heard Sophie start crying inside, followed by Lucas's angry shouts and Maya's attempts to calm them both. Through the window, Sarah watched her children's world continue to crumble. The fancy furniture James had insisted on buying, the expensive art pieces he'd claimed would appreciate in value, the life they'd built in this house. All of it slipping away like sand through her fingers. Maya appeared at the window, her young face set with a determination that broke Sarah's heart. She was holding Sophie, who had cried herself to sleep, while Lucas sat at her feet, methodically tearing pages from his father's favorite book. The men with clipboards were still talking, but Sarah could only focus on her children's faces, 3 innocent lives caught in the crossfire of their father's betrayal, about to lose the only home they'd ever known. Mrs. Wong, the counselor, Ms. Thompson, reviewed the single page with a furrowed brow. I see you have a degree in art history and worked as a gallery curator 12 years ago. Yes, before the children. Sarah's fingers twisted the now empty space where her wedding ring used to be. James wanted me to focus on the family, said my working wasn't necessary. Ms. Thompson's expression softened. And now you need to re-enter the workforce immediately. I have 3 children, Sarah's voice cracked. The youngest needs specialized therapy, and I have less than 30 days before we lose our house. I'll take anything. Please. The gap in your employment history makes things challenging. Ms. Thompson typed something into her computer. Most entry-level positions won't cover your immediate needs, and higher-level positions will want recent experience. Sarah leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. I can learn. I can work multiple jobs. I just need... Her phone buzzed, a text from Maya. Mom. Sophie's school called again. She had another panic attack. They can't reach her therapist because the bills aren't paid. Sarah's hands began to shake. I'm sorry. I need to... Wait, Ms. Thompson called as Sarah stood. There's an administrative assistant position opening up at Morton and Associates. It's entry-level, but they offer health benefits after 60 days. 60 days? Sarah laughed bitterly. We'll be living in our car by then. Mrs. Wong. Ms. Thompson hesitated, then reached for a different file. There's a night shift position at the local warehouse. It's physical work, but it pays weekly. You could do both. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Lucas this time. The cafeteria lady wouldn't let me get lunch. Said our account is empty. Tears threatened to spill, but Sarah blinked them back. When can I start? The warehouse position begins tonight. Morton and Associates interviews are tomorrow morning. I'll take them. Both of them. Sarah gathered her purse already calculating. The warehouse shift ends at 6 a.m.? I can get home, get the kids to school, make the interview by 9. Mrs. Wong, Ms. Thompson's voice was gentle. When will you sleep? Sarah met her eyes with steel determination. Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now. My children need to eat. They need a roof over their heads. They need... Her voice broke as another text came through. A photo from Maya of Sophie curled up in the nurse's office, crying for her father. I used to organize charity galas, Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Miss Thompson. I coordinated with international artists, managed 6-figure budgets, spoke 3 languages, and now I'm grateful for the chance to pack boxes at night and file papers during the day. Your situation is temporary, Ms. Thompson offered. With your education, once you get some current experience. Temporary? Sarah's laugh was hollow. Tell that to my 4-year-old who cries herself to sleep every night. Tell that to my son who's starting to punch walls. Tell that to my daughter who's trying to be a mother to her siblings because she thinks I'm falling apart. She stood straighter, squaring her shoulders. I'll take both jobs. I'll take anything you have. Just help me keep my children from losing anything else. As Sarah walked out of the employment agency, her phone buzzed with another message, an alert from the bank about an overdraft fee. The morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the weight she carried. But she had no choice. Her children were waiting, and she was all they had left. Mom! Maya's eyes were wide with panic. I'm sorry. I tried to let you sleep a little longer. But Sophie had a nightmare and Lucas won't get out of bed and we're going to be late and... Sarah pulled her daughter into a hug, feeling the trembling in Maya's thin frame. It's okay, sweetheart. You did great. I've got this now. She moved through the cramped space, her muscles protesting with every step. In the bedroom the three children now shared, she found Sophie curled up in a ball, clutching the last photo they had of James. "Daddy said monsters aren't real," Sophie whimpered. "But they're in my dreams. Why did he lie?" Sarah's heart clenched as she stroked Sophie's hair. "Sometimes, baby, the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see. But I promise, I'll always protect you from them." In the bunk above, Lucas had buried himself under his blankets. "I'm not going," came his muffled voice. "I hate that school. Everyone knows we're poor now." "Lucas, please," Sarah pleaded, her exhaustion making her voice crack. "I know it's hard, but education is so important. Your father might have taken our money, but he can't take your future." "What future?" Lucas emerged, his eyes red-rimmed. "We live in a shoebox. You work all the time. Everything's ruined." A crash from the kitchen made them all jump. Sarah rushed out to find Maya on the floor, surrounded by shattered plates, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I can't do this," Maya whispered. "I can't be you, Mom. I'm trying, but I can't." Sarah knelt beside her, ignoring the shards cutting into her knees. "Oh, my brave girl, you don't have to be me. You just have to be Maya." The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, reminding Sarah of the impending school bell and her own 9 a.m. shift at the office. She closed her eyes, fighting against the wave of despair threatening to drown her. "Okay, new plan," she announced, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "We're having a mental health day. All of us." Lucas peeked out from the bedroom. "Really? No school?" "No school," Sarah confirmed. "We're going to the park. We're going to feed the ducks, play on the swings, and remember how to smile. Just for today." Sophie's small hand slipped into hers. "Can we pretend Daddy's with us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. Maya stood up, brushing off her clothes. "No, Sophie. We don't need to pretend anymore. We have each other, and that's enough." As they left the apartment, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her boss at Morton and Associates. "Where are you? The Jacobson file is due at 10. Sarah stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. The responsible thing would be to go to work, to keep this job they so desperately needed. But as she looked at her children's faces, Maya's premature worry lines, Lucas's simmering anger, Sophie's fragile hope, she made her choice. "Let's go feed those ducks," she said, turning off her phone. They stepped out into the morning sunlight, a small, broken family trying to piece themselves back together. Sarah knew there would be consequences for this decision, knew that the bills and responsibilities would still be waiting when they returned. But for now, for just this one precious day, she would give her children the gift of their mother's undivided attention, something they had all been missing for far too long. A soft knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Detective Ramirez, the officer assigned to James's case. "Mrs. Wong," he said, his expression grave. "May I come in?" Sarah's heart raced as she led him to the cramped living room. "Have you found him?" Detective Ramirez shook his head. "Not exactly, but we've uncovered some concerning information." He pulled out a folder. "We've been tracking James's digital footprint. It seems he didn't act alone." "What do you mean?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "There's evidence of a larger network. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified identities. Your husband, he was part of something much bigger than we initially thought." Sarah's mind reeled. But James was just a real estate developer. He couldn't have... "Mrs. Wong," Detective Ramirez interrupted gently. "We have reason to believe James Wong isn't his real name." The room seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the edge of the sofa, feeling as if the floor might disappear beneath her. "Not his real... What are you saying?" "We found multiple passports, all with different names but your husband's photo. Birth certificates from 3 different countries. The man you married. He may have been living under an assumed identity for years." A strangled laugh escaped Sarah's throat. "So not only did he steal our money and abandon his children, but he wasn't even the person we thought he was?" Tears stung her eyes. "Who did I marry, Detective?" Who is the father of my children? Before he could answer, a small voice came from the hallway. Mom? What's going on? Maya stood there, her eyes wide with fear, Lucas and Sophie peeking out from behind her. Detective Ramirez stood quickly. I should go. Mrs. Wong will need you to come to the station tomorrow to go over some details. And you might want to consider witness protection. If this network is as extensive as we think, the implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah nodded numbly, walking him to the door. As soon as it closed, Maya was at her side. Mom, why was that police officer here? Did they find Dad? Sarah looked at her children, Maya's protective stance, Lucas's clenched fists, Sophie's trembling lip, and felt a surge of fierce determination. Come here, all of you, she said, gathering them into a tight hug. I need you to listen carefully. Your father. The situation is more complicated than we thought. But I promise you, no matter what happens, I will keep you safe. Are we in danger? Lucas asked, his voice small. Sarah stroked his hair, her mind racing. No, sweetheart, we're going to be okay. We might need to make some changes, but we'll face them together. More changes? Sophie whimpered. I don't want any more changes. I want things to go back to normal. Oh, baby. Sarah kissed her forehead, fighting back tears. I know, but sometimes we have to create a new normal. And that's what we're going to do. As her children clung to her, Sarah's gaze fell on the family photo still hanging on the wall, a snapshot of a life that now seemed like a beautiful lie. The man in that photo, the man she thought she knew, was a stranger, a potential criminal, a ghost. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Ramirez. Consider packing essentials. We may need to move you quickly. Sarah held her children tighter, her mind whirling with impossible decisions. How could she uproot them again? How could she protect them from a threat she didn't fully understand? And how could she ever trust her own judgment again, when the life she'd built had been founded on such a monumental deception? As the night deepened around their small apartment, Sarah Wong faced the terrifying reality that her fight to keep her family together was far from over. In fact, it might have only just begun. Agent Carlson, a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair, addressed them. Mrs. Wong, we understand this is difficult, but given the scope of the investigation and the potential threats to your family's safety, we strongly recommend you enter the program immediately. Sarah felt Maya's hand tighten in hers. What exactly does that mean for us? New identities, new location, complete severance from your past life. Agent Carlson replied matter-of-factly. It's the only way to ensure your protection. Lucas, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly burst out. No, I won't go. I won't leave my school, my friends. It's not fair. Lucas, please, Sarah started, but her son was already storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Sophie began to cry, burying her face in Sarah's side. Mommy, I don't want a new name. I like being Sophie. Maya, ever the mature one, asked the question Sarah was too afraid to voice. If we do this, will we ever be able to come back? What if Dad tries to find us? The room fell silent at the mention of James. Agent Carlson's expression softened slightly. Your father is the reason you're in this situation. The organization he was involved with. They don't take kindly to loose ends. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying we're in immediate danger? Before Agent Carlson could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Another agent burst into the room, his face pale. We've got a breach. Someone's trying to access the secure floor. Chaos erupted. Agents swarmed around them, ushering them towards a back exit. Sarah scooped up Sophie, grabbing Maya's hand as they ran. Wait, Sarah cried out. My son, Lucas, is still out there. We'll find him, an agent assured her. But the words felt hollow as they were rushed into an unmarked van. As they sped away from the building, Sarah's mind raced. Who had breached the building? Was it James? The criminal organization he was involved with? And Lucas? Oh God, Lucas was still in there. Sophie sobbed in her arms, while Maya sat rigidly, her young face set in a mask of determination. "Mom," she whispered, "what are we going to do?" Sarah looked at her daughters, then back at the rapidly disappearing building where her son was still inside. In that moment, she made a decision that would change their lives forever. "Stop the van," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The agent driving looked at her in disbelief. "Mrs. Wong, we can't." "I said stop the van." Sarah's voice rose with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. "I will not leave my son behind. I will not let whoever is after us tear my family apart any further." As the van screeched to a halt, Sarah turned to her daughters. "Maya, I need you to be brave. Take your sister and go with these agents. They'll keep you safe." "No!" Maya cried, clinging to her mother. "We won't leave you." Sarah cupped her daughter's face, fighting back tears. "Listen to me. I will find Lucas and I will come back for you. Promise. But right now I need to know you're safe." With a heart-wrenching kiss to both her daughters' foreheads, Sarah stepped out of the van. As it sped away with her precious cargo, she turned back towards the chaos, her heart pounding but her resolve unshakable. She had lost her husband, her home, and her sense of security, but she would not lose her son. Not today. Not ever. With a deep breath, Sarah Wong walked back into the fire, ready to face whatever or whoever was waiting for her. "Lucas," she called out, her voice barely audible above the din. "Lucas, where are you?" As she rounded a corner, she collided with a tall figure. For a split second, her heart stopped. Was it James? But no, it was Agent Carlson, her face etched with concern and frustration. "Mrs. Wong, what are you doing here? You need to evacuate immediately." Sarah grabbed the agent's arm. "My son is still in here somewhere. I'm not leaving without him." A loud crash echoed from down the hall, followed by shouting. Agent Carlson's hand went to her weapon. "Mrs. Wong, please. It's not safe. We have men looking for your son. You need to," but Sarah was already moving, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. She burst through a set of double doors and froze. There, at the end of the hallway, was Lucas. But he wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit had his hand on Lucas's shoulder, speaking to him in low, urgent tones. Even from this distance, Sarah would recognize that stance, that gesture, anywhere. "James," she whispered, her voice a mixture of shock, anger, and God help her, a tiny flicker of relief. Lucas's head snapped up. "Mom!" James turned, his eyes meeting Sarah's. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Lucas broke free, running towards his mother. "Stop right there!" Agent Carlson's voice rang out as she entered behind Sarah, her gun drawn. James raised his hand slowly. "Sarah," he said, his voice achingly familiar yet somehow foreign. "Please, let me explain." Sarah pulled Lucas close, her arms wrapping protectively around him. "Explain? Explain how you abandoned us? Stole from us? Left us with nothing?" "Mom," Lucas interrupted, his voice trembling. "He says he did it to protect us. That bad people were after him, and he had to go away to keep us safe." Sarah looked down at her son, seeing the confusion and hope warring in his eyes. Then she looked back at James, or whatever his real name was. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before James could answer, more shouting erupted from down the hall. Agent Carlson grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to move now. This whole place is compromised." James stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, please, come with me. I can explain everything, but not here. Not now. I know a safe place." Sarah's mind raced. Every logical part of her screamed not to trust this man who had betrayed her so completely. But as she looked at Lucas, saw the desperate hope in his eyes, she knew she had to make an impossible choice. "My daughters," she said, her voice steely. "They're in a van heading God knows where. I'm not going anywhere without them." James nodded, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a phone. "I can find them. I have resources. But we need to leave now." Agent Carlson stepped between them. "Mrs. Wong, you can't seriously be considering." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Debris rained down from the ceiling. In that moment of chaos, Sarah made her decision. She grabbed Lucas's hand and reached for James's outstretched arm. "If you're lying to me," she hissed, "if this puts my children in danger, I swear I'll—" "I know," James said softly. "I'll explain everything. Promise." As they rushed towards an emergency exit, alarms blaring around them, Sarah's mind whirled with questions. Who was this man she had married? What danger had he brought into their lives? And most importantly, how would she ever keep her children safe in a world that had suddenly become so treacherous? The sunlight hit their faces as they burst out of the building, running towards an unmarked car. As James ushered them in, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, a woman she barely recognized, about to embark on a journey that would either save her family or destroy them completely. "Where are we going?" Sarah demanded, her voice tight with fear and anger. "And where are my daughters?" James glanced at her in the mirror. "I have a safe house on the outskirts of town. My contact is tracking the van with Maya and Sophie. They'll meet us there." Lucas looked up at his mother, his eyes wide. "Mom, are we in danger? Who are those bad people after Dad?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but James cut in. "It's complicated, buddy. But I promise, I'm going to make everything right." "Don't," Sarah hissed, her voice low enough for only James to hear. "Don't make promises to him. You lost that right when you abandoned us." James flinched but kept his eyes on the road. "Sarah, I know you have no reason to trust me, but everything I did, every lie I told, was to keep you and the kids safe." "Safe?" Sarah's laugh was hollow. "We almost lost our home. The children are traumatized. How is that keeping us safe?" Before James could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face paling. "We've got company. Hold on tight." Suddenly, the car swerved sharply, throwing Sarah and Lucas against the door. In the side mirror, Sarah caught a glimpse of a black SUV gaining on them. "James!" she cried out, clutching Lucas closer. "What's happening?" "The people I was working for," James said through gritted teeth as he maneuvered through traffic. "They're not too happy with my early retirement." Lucas whimpered, burying his face in Sarah's side. She stroked his hair, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "It's okay, baby. We're going to be okay." The pursuing vehicle was getting closer. Sarah could see the determined faces of the men inside, and her blood ran cold when she noticed the guns in their hands. "James," she whispered, "they have weapons." His jaw clenched. "There's a gun in the glove compartment. You remember how to use one?" Sarah's mind flashed back to their third date, when James had taken her to a shooting range. She thought it was an odd choice then. Now it made a terrifying kind of sense. With shaking hands, she reached for the glove compartment, feeling the cold metal of the gun inside. "Mom!" Lucas's voice was small, frightened. "What are you doing?" Sarah looked at her son, then at James, then at the approaching danger behind them. In that moment, she realized their lives would never be the same. The Sarah Wong who organized charity galas and worried about PTA meetings was gone. In her place was a woman who would do anything to protect her children. "Lucas, honey, I need you to lie down on the floor of the car and cover your ears. Okay?" Her voice was steady, belying the terror coursing through her veins. As Lucas complied, Sarah took a deep breath and turned in her seat, the gun heavy in her hands. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Who are you really? And what have you gotten our family into?" James met her eyes in the rearview mirror, a world of regret and determination in his gaze. "It's a long story, Sarah, but I promise once we're safe, I'll tell you everything." The SUV behind them rammed into their bumper, the impact jolting them forward. Sarah steadied herself, raising the gun with trembling hands. "For our children's sake," she said, her finger on the trigger. "I hope your explanation is worth all this." As the chase intensified, Sarah Wong prepared herself for a fight she never imagined she'd face, with a man she thought she knew by her side, and the lives of her children hanging in the balance. "This way," James urged, leading them through a maze of rusty machinery. Sarah's heart pounded as she clutched Lucas's hand, the gun still gripped tightly in her other. James, where are we? What is this place? Before he could answer, a familiar voice called out, Mom! Sarah whirled around to see Maya running towards them, Sophie in her arms. Relief flooded through her as she embraced her daughters. Oh, thank God, she breathed, kissing their faces. Are you all right? How did you get here? A nice lady brought us, Sophie said, pointing to a corner where a woman with short, dark hair stood watching them. James nodded to the woman. Thank you, May. We owe you. May's expression was grim. Save the thanks. We've got about 5 minutes before they find us here. Sarah's head was spinning. Will someone please tell me what's going on? Who are these people after us? And who are you? She directed the last question at James, her voice breaking. James took a deep breath, pain etched across his face. My real name is David Chun. I was an undercover agent infiltrating a global financial crime syndicate. The life we had, it was my deep cover identity. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She staggered back, steadying herself against a rusty pillar. Our whole marriage, our family, it was all a lie? No, James? Or David reached for her, but she flinched away. The love was real, Sarah. You and the kids. You became my real life. That's why I had to leave. They found out I was an agent. I thought if I disappeared, took their money, they'd come after me and leave you alone. But I was wrong. Lucas looked up at his father, confusion and hurt in his eyes. So, you're not really a bad guy? You didn't abandon us? David knelt down, his eyes glistening. I never wanted to leave you, buddy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought I was protecting you. The sound of screeching tires outside cut through the moment. May appeared, her face tense. They're here. We need to move. Now. David stood, his expression hardening into one of determination. There's a tunnel system beneath this warehouse. It'll lead us to a safe house. Sarah looked at her children. Maya's protective stance over Sophie, Lucas's wide-eyed fear, Sophie's trembling lip, and then at the man she thought she knew. In that moment, she made a decision. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But after this, no more lies. No more secrets. If we're going to survive this, we do it together. David nodded, relief washing over his face. Together, he agreed. As they rushed toward the hidden entrance, the sound of gunfire erupted outside. Sophie whimpered, and Sarah scooped her up, whispering soothing words. Maya grabbed Lucas's hand, her young face set with a determination beyond her years. We've got this, right, Mom? Sarah met her daughter's eyes, seeing a strength there that mirrored her own. Yes, sweetheart, we've got this. As they descended into the dark tunnel, Sarah's mind raced with questions and fears. But one thing was clear, her family was together, and she would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them as they plunged deeper into the unknown. Sarah glanced back at David, seeing the man she fell in love with and the stranger he'd become all at once. Where does this tunnel lead? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David's answer was grim. To a choice. One that will change our lives forever. As they hurried through the darkness, the weight of that unknown choice hung heavily in the air, along with the promise of a future none of them could have imagined. Finally, they emerged into a small, concrete room. A heavy metal door stood at one end, and a computer terminal flickered to life as David approached it. This is it, he said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Our way out. Out to where? Sarah asked, setting Sophie down but keeping her close. David turned to face them, his expression grave. That's the choice I mentioned. This terminal connects to a global network of safe houses. Once I input our destination, all traces of where we've gone will be erased. But what? Maya pressed, her young voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. But we can never come back, David finished. The life we knew, our identities, everything, it all ends here. We'll have new names, new backgrounds. We'll be starting over completely. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Sarah looked at her children, saw the mixture of fear and determination on their faces. Then she turned to David, the man she'd loved, lost, and found again in the span of a heartbeat. "Do we have any other choice?" she asked softly. The sound of footsteps in the tunnel behind them grew louder. David shook his head. "Not if we want to survive. Not if we want to keep the kids safe." Lucas stepped forward, his small hand finding Sarah's. "Mom, I'm scared, but I think we should do it. We can't go back, can we?" Sarah knelt down, drawing all three children close. "Listen to me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "No matter where we go, no matter what names we have, we will always be a family. That's the one thing they can never take from us. Do you understand?" Sophie nodded, her little face serious. "We're the Wong family, even if we have to be someone else on the outside." "Chun," David corrected gently. "We were always meant to be the Chun family." Maya looked up at him, years of hurt and confusion in her eyes. "Will you tell us everything now? The whole truth?" David knelt beside them, joining the family circle. "I promise. No more secrets. No more lies. From this moment on, we face everything together." A loud bang echoed from the tunnel, making them all jump. David rushed to the terminal, his fingers poised over the keys. "Sarah," he said, looking back at her, "it has to be your choice. I've made enough decisions for this family. What do you want to do?" Sarah stood, gathering her strength. She looked at each of her children, seeing their trust and love reflected back at her. Then she met David's gaze, seeing the man she fell in love with, the stranger he became, and the ally he now was. "Do it," she said firmly. "Get us out of here. We'll face whatever comes next as a family." David nodded, relief and determination mingling on his face as he turned to the terminal. "Okay, here we go." As his fingers danced across the keyboard, Sarah held her breath. This was it, the moment their old lives would end and a new, unknown future would begin. The metal door began to slide open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a bright white light beyond. At the same moment, the sound of shouting voices grew closer in the tunnel behind them. "Now!" David shouted, grabbing Sophie and rushing towards the light. "Go, go, go!" Sarah pushed Maya and Lucas forward, sparing one last glance at the dark tunnel that led back to everything they'd known. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped into the blinding light, leaving Sarah Wong behind and embracing whatever and whoever she would become. As the door slid shut behind them, sealing off their past, the Chun family plunged into a new world of uncertainty, danger, and hope. "Welcome, Chun family," she said, her tone professional yet warm. "I'm Agent Lydia Kong. We need to get you in the air immediately." As they were ushered to plush seats, the engines roared to life. Sarah clutched Sophie close, while Maya and Lucas pressed against her sides. David sat across from them, his eyes never leaving his family. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of takeoff. Agent Kang's expression was carefully neutral. "For security reasons, I can't disclose our destination until we're airborne. What I can tell you is that you'll be safe there." As the plane leveled off, Sophie's small voice broke the tense silence. "Mommy, I left Mr. Snuggles behind." Her lip quivered, thinking of her beloved stuffed rabbit. Sarah's heart clenched. It was such a small thing, but it represented everything they'd left behind. "Oh, sweetheart." Before she could continue, David reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn, familiar stuffed rabbit. "You mean this Mr. Snuggles?" Sophie's eyes lit up as she hugged her toy. "You saved him." David's smile was tinged with sadness. "I couldn't let you leave him behind. I know how much he means to you." Sarah stared at David, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. "You went back for a stuffed animal? You risked everything for that?" "I risked everything for them," David said softly, gesturing to their children. "For all of you. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'm hoping this is a start." Maya, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "So what do we call you now? Dad? David? Agent Chun?" David leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "I'd like to be Dad, if that's okay." But I understand if you need time. Lucas looked up, his young face serious. Will you teach me how to be a spy? A chuckle escaped David's lips, but it quickly faded. Being a spy isn't all excitement, buddy. It's dangerous, and it hurts the people you love. I don't want that life for you. Sarah watched this exchange, her mind reeling. Just days ago, her biggest concern had been making ends meet. Now, she was on a plane to God knows where with a husband she thought she knew, running from dangers she couldn't even name. David, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, you promised no more secrets. I think it's time you told us everything. He nodded, taking a deep breath. You're right. You all deserve the truth. He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes lingering on Sarah. It started 10 years ago before I met you. I was recruited by a joint task force to infiltrate a global financial crime syndicate. As David began his tale, Sarah felt as though she was hearing the plot of a movie, not the real-life story of the man she'd married. International conspiracies, high-stakes undercover work, a web of lies so intricate it made her head spin. And then I met you, David continued, his voice softening. Falling in love with you, starting our family. It wasn't part of the mission, but it became my whole world. That's why I had to leave. I thought I could protect you by disappearing. Sarah's mind flashed back to all the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the unexplained absences. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, tears threatening to spill. We could have faced it together. David reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid you'd be in danger if you knew. I see now that keeping you in the dark only put you in more danger. Agent Kong cleared her throat, reminding them of her presence. I hate to interrupt, but we're approaching our destination. There's something you all need to know before we land. The family turned to her, tension thick in the air. Your new identities are waiting for you, Agent Kong explained. New names, new backgrounds, new lives. From the moment we touch down, you must fully embrace these identities. Your survival depends on it. Sarah looked at her children, saw the mix of fear and excitement in their eyes. Then she turned to David, the stranger she was learning to trust again. Okay, she said, squeezing his hand. Whatever comes next, we face it as a family. As the plane began its descent, Sarah Chun, no longer Sarah Wong, steeled herself for whatever new world awaited them. The past was gone, but the future, uncertain as it was, held the promise of a fresh start. Agent Kong led them to a nondescript SUV. Welcome to your new home, she said, gesturing to the picturesque landscape around them. From this moment on, you are the Taylor family. David and Sarah Taylor, with your children Emily, Max, and Lily. Maya, now Emily, spoke up, her voice a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Where exactly are we? A small town in New Zealand, Agent Kong replied. Remote enough to keep you safe, but connected enough to give you a semblance of normal life. As they drove through winding roads, Sarah's mind raced. New Zealand, halfway across the world from everything and everyone they'd known. The reality of their situation hit her anew. David, she reminded herself to think of him as David Taylor now, squeezed her hand. It's beautiful here, he said softly. We can make this work. We can be happy. Sarah wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. How can we be happy living a lie? It's not all a lie, David insisted. Our love for each other, for our children, that's real. We're just building a new truth around it. They pulled up to a charming two-story house with a sprawling yard. It looked like something out of a postcard, a far cry from their cramped apartment back home. As they stepped inside, Agent Kong handed them each a folder. These contain your new identities, backgrounds, jobs, school information. Memorize them, live them. Your safety depends on it. Lucas, now Max, opened his folder eagerly. Cool. It says I'm on the school soccer team. Sophie, Lily tugged at Sarah's sleeve. Mommy, can I still be Sophie when it's just us at home? Sarah knelt down, fighting back tears. Of course, sweetheart. At home, we can always be ourselves. Agent Kang's expression softened. I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone. There's a support network in place. Your neighbors, the Wilsons, are also in witness protection. They'll help you adjust. As Agent Kang prepared to leave, Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. Wait, how do we do this? How do we just become different people? The agent paused at the door. One day at a time, Mrs. Taylor. Remember, you're not just hiding, you're building a new life. Embrace it. With that, she was gone, leaving the newly minted Taylor family alone in their unfamiliar home. David clapped his hands together, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. All right, team, let's explore our new castle. Shall we? As the children raced off to claim bedrooms, Sarah stood in the living room, feeling lost. David approached her cautiously. Sarah, he said, his voice low, I know this is hard. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But I promise you, I will spend every day making it up to you, to our family. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man she fell in love with and the stranger he'd become all at once. I want to trust you, David. But how can I when our entire life is built on secrets and lies? Before he could answer, Emily called from upstairs. Mom, Dad, you have to see this view. They climbed the stairs together, finding their children crowded around a large window overlooking a stunning vista of mountains and forests. Max, pressed his face against the glass. It's like we're in a whole new world. Sophie, Lily nodded solemnly. A world where Daddy didn't have to go away. Sarah felt David tense beside her. She looked at her family, these resilient, brave children and the man who had turned their lives upside down to protect them. In that moment, she made a decision. You're right, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. This is our new world. And in this world, we stick together. No more secrets, no more lies. We face whatever comes as a family. David's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he pulled her close. As a family, he echoed. As they stood there, the Taylor family, once the Wongs, once the Chens, gazed out at the landscape of their new life. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face it together, one day at a time, building a new truth from the ashes of their old lives. The sun began to set over the mountains, casting a golden glow over their new home. It was beautiful, Sarah thought. Beautiful and terrifying, and full of possibility. On Monday morning, as David prepared to leave for his job as a high school history teacher, Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her hands shaking as she straightened his tie, a gesture so familiar yet now laden with new meaning. David cupped her face gently. You can, Sarah. You're the strongest person I know. Remember, we're not just pretending. We're building a new life. As he left, Sarah turned to find Emily. She corrected herself, watching her with worried eyes. Mom, Emily said softly. Are you okay? Sarah forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just adjusting. How are you feeling about starting at your new school today? Emily's face clouded. I'm scared. What if I slip up? What if I forget my new name? Sarah pulled her daughter close. You won't. And even if you do, we'll figure it out. Remember what Agent Kang said. There are other families like us here. You're not alone. As they walked Max, and Sophie, Lily, to the bus stop, Sarah felt as though she was in a dream. The picturesque neighborhood, the friendly waves from neighbors, the crisp mountain air, it all felt surreal. Remember, she said, kneeling to look each child in the eye. You're Max and Lily Taylor. You've just moved here from Auckland because your dad got a new job. You're excited about the mountains and can't wait to make new friends. Max nodded solemnly. I know, Mom. We've practiced. Lily clutched Mr. Snuggles tightly. Can Mr. Snuggles come to school with me? He's scared of being alone in the new house. Sarah's heart clenched. Of course, sweetie. Mr. Snuggles can help you be brave. As the school bus pulled away, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find a woman with kind eyes smiling at her. You must be Sarah Taylor, the woman said. I'm Claire Wilson, your neighbor. I saw you all at the bus stop and thought I'd introduce myself. Sarah's mind raced, remembering what Agent Kong had said about the Wilsons. Yes, that's right. It's nice to meet you, Claire. Claire's voice lowered. I know this is all overwhelming. My family and I have been here for 2 years now. If you need anything, advice, a friendly ear, or just someone who understands, I'm right next door. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. Thank you. I might take you up on that. As Claire walked away, Sarah felt a mix of relief and trepidation. Here was someone who understood, someone who had walked this path before. But it was also a stark reminder of the reality of their situation. They weren't just starting over, they were hiding. Back in the house, Sarah sat at her new desk, staring at the computer screen. She was supposed to be working on a design project, part of her cover. But her mind kept wandering. What were her friends back home thinking? Had they noticed her family's sudden disappearance? And the syndicate that was after them, were they still searching? A notification popped up on her screen, an encrypted message from Agent Kong. Settling in okay? Remember, maintain cover at all times. Report any suspicious activity immediately. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. There was so much she wanted to say, so many questions she wanted to ask. Instead, she simply typed, all okay. Kids started school. David at work, trying to adjust. As she hit send, Sarah gazed out the window at the beautiful, unfamiliar landscape. This was their life now. A delicate balance of truth and fiction, of building a future while constantly looking over their shoulders. She picked up a family photo they'd been given as part of their cover story. The Taylor family smiling on a beach she'd never visited. It looked so real, so happy. Maybe, she thought, if they pretended long enough, it would become real. But as she set the photo down, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the shadows of their past, danger was still lurking, waiting for them to let their guard down. One evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, she overheard a heated conversation between David and Emily in the living room. I don't want to go to Zoe's sleepover. Emily's voice trembled with frustration. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of lying to my friends. David's response was low, urgent. Emily, sweetheart, I know it's hard, but you have to maintain your cover. It's crucial for our safety. Our safety. Emily's voice rose. We wouldn't need to worry about our safety if you hadn't lied to us for years. Sarah's hand froze on the wooden spoon she'd been stirring with. The silence that followed was deafening. You're right, David finally said, his voice heavy with regret. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that up to you. But right now, we need to focus on moving forward. Emily's footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by the slam of a door. Sarah entered the living room to find David with his head in his hands. She hates me, he whispered. Sarah sat beside him, her own emotions a tangled mess. She doesn't hate you. She's just struggling. We all are. Before David could respond, Max burst through the front door, his face flushed with excitement. Mom, Dad, I made the soccer team. He paused, taking in their somber expressions. What's wrong? Did something happen? Sarah forced a smile. Nothing's wrong, sweetie. That's wonderful news about the soccer team. Why don't you go wash up for dinner? As Max bounded upstairs, Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching Mr. Snuggles. Mommy, can we have pizza tonight? Like we used to back home? The innocence of the request hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Oh, honey, I'm not sure we can find the same kind of pizza here, but maybe we can try something similar soon. Lily's face fell. I miss our old home. I miss my old friends. David knelt down, pulling Lily into a hug. I know, princess, but we're making new friends here, aren't we? And look at all the beautiful mountains we can explore now. As they gathered for dinner, the tension was palpable. Emily picked at her food, avoiding eye contact. Max chatted excitedly about soccer, oblivious to the undercurrents. Lily kept glancing at the empty space on the wall, where family photos should have been. Sarah cleared her throat. I was thinking, maybe this weekend we could go on a picnic? Explore some of those hiking trails we've been talking about. David latched onto the idea. That sounds great. What do you kids think? Emily shrugged non-committally. Max nodded enthusiastically. Lily just hugged Mr. Snuggles tighter. As Sarah began clearing the dishes, a sharp knock at the door made everyone freeze. David's hand instinctively went to the small of his back, where Sarah knew he kept a concealed weapon. "Stay here," he murmured, moving cautiously to the door. Sarah's heart pounded as she gathered the children close. Who could it be? Had they been found? Was their cover blown? David peered through the peephole, then visibly relaxed. He opened the door to reveal Claire Wilson, holding a covered dish. "Hey neighbors!" Claire's cheerful voice carried into the house. "I made too much lasagna and thought you might like some." As David invited her in, Sarah felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. This was their life now, constant vigilance, even in moments of normalcy. Later that night, as the children slept, Sarah and David sat on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Do you think it will ever feel real?" Sarah asked softly. "This life we're living?" David took her hand, his touch both familiar and foreign. "I hope so. I have to believe that one day we'll find peace here." But as a cool breeze rustled through the trees, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their past was still out there, waiting. And she wondered how long they could keep running before it finally caught up with them. "Mom," Max tugged at her sleeve. "Can we get a pumpkin? Everyone at school is talking about carving jack-o'-lanterns." Sarah blinked, forcing herself back to the present. "Of course, sweetie. Let's pick one out." As they browsed the pumpkins, Sarah felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She glanced around, her instincts on high alert. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet, "Sarah? Sarah Taylor?" A vaguely familiar voice called out. Sarah turned, her heart racing, to see a woman approaching with a friendly smile. It took her a moment to place her Amanda, another mom from Max's soccer team. "Oh, hi Amanda," Sarah managed, silently cursing herself for the delay in recognition. Amanda didn't seem to notice. "I'm so glad I ran into you. I wanted to ask if Max would like to join our Halloween party. We're having all the kids from the soccer team over for trick-or-treating." Max looked up at Sarah, his eyes pleading. She hesitated, years of caution warring with the desire to give her son a normal childhood experience. "That sounds lovely," Sarah heard herself say. "We'd be happy to join." As Amanda chatted about costume ideas, Sarah's mind raced. A party meant more interactions, more chances to slip up. But it also meant integration, building their cover deeper into the community. Later that evening, as Sarah recounted the invitation to David, she saw the same conflict playing out on his face. "It's risky," he said, running a hand through his hair. But we can't keep them isolated forever," Sarah finished. "They need to build a life here, same as us." David nodded, then lowered his voice. "There's something else. I received a coded message from my old handler today. The syndicate, they're expanding their operations. Getting bolder." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Are they looking for us?" "Not specifically, as far as we know, but they're branching out globally, including areas near New Zealand." The implication hung heavy in the air. Their safe haven might not be safe for much longer. Just then, Emily entered the kitchen, her face uncharacteristically animated. "Mom, Dad, guess what? I got the lead in the school play." For a moment, Sarah forgot about syndicate threats and cover stories. Her daughter, her beautiful, resilient daughter, was smiling for the first time in months. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." Sarah pulled Emily into a hug. "What's the play?" "Romeo and Juliet." Emily beamed. "I'm playing Juliet." David's face paled slightly. That's a very visible role, honey. Are you sure you're comfortable with that?" Emily's smile faltered. "What do you mean? I thought you'd be happy for me." Sarah shot David a warning look. "We are happy for you, Emily. It's just a big commitment. We want to make sure you're ready for it." Emily's eyes narrowed, the brief moment of joy evaporating. "You mean you want to make sure I don't slip up and reveal our big secret, right? God, I can't even have this one normal thing." She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Sarah and David in tense silence. "We can't keep doing this to them," Sarah whispered. We can't keep asking them to give up everything. David nodded, his expression pained. I know, but what choice do we have? Before Sarah could answer, Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching Mr. Snuggles. Mommy? Daddy? I had a bad dream. There were scary men looking for us. Sarah and David exchanged a loaded glance. How much of Lily's fear was just a child's nightmare, and how much was a reflection of the very real danger that lurked in their past? As Sarah scooped Lily up, soothing her with gentle words, she couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed new life was balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and it could all come crashing down. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. It sounded almost like whispers, Sarah thought. Whispers of the past, of secrets, of a threat that was drawing ever closer. Remember, sweetie, she said, adjusting his mask. If anyone asks about our old home. Max sighed, cutting her off. I know, Mom. We're from Auckland. Dad got a job transfer. I've got it. Sarah's heart clenched at the weariness in her son's voice. She knelt down, meeting his eyes. I'm sorry, Max. I know this is hard, but tonight I want you to focus on having fun, okay? Be a kid. Enjoy the party. A small smile tugged at Max's lips. Really? You mean it? I mean it, Sarah nodded, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. Go get all the candy you can carry. As Max bounded down the stairs, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. Sarah Taylor, suburban mom, graphic designer, Halloween partygoer. It all felt like a costume she was wearing, just as much as Max's superhero outfit. Downstairs, she found David helping Lily into her fairy princess dress. Emily sat on the couch, stubbornly refusing to dress up. David pleaded, are you sure you don't want to come? Could be fun. Emily's glare could have melted steel. Fun? Pretending to be someone I'm not? No thanks. I do that enough every day. Before David could respond, a knock at the door made everyone freeze. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the small of her back, where she now kept a concealed weapon, a precaution David had insisted on. David moved cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. His shoulders relaxed as he opened it, revealing Amanda and her son Tommy, both in elaborate pirate costumes. Ahoy, mateys! Amanda grinned. Ready for some trick-or-treating? As they walked to the party, Sarah kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every stranger a possible enemy. She hated feeling this way, hated that she couldn't just enjoy a simple Halloween night with her family. At the party, Max quickly integrated with his teammates, laughing and comparing costume ideas. Lily twirled in her fairy dress, delighting in the compliments from other parents. For a moment, watching them, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Maybe they could have this. Maybe they could build a real life here. But then she caught sight of David, his posture tense as he scanned the room, and reality came crashing back. They could never fully let their guard down. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself in conversation with Claire Wilson, who was dressed as a witch. How are you holding up? Claire asked softly, her eyes understanding. Sarah sighed. It's challenging, especially for the kids. Emily refused to come tonight. She's struggling the most with everything. Claire nodded sympathetically. It gets easier, but it never becomes easy. The constant vigilance, the fear of slipping up. It's exhausting. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion near the snack table caught their attention. Max was there, his face pale, surrounded by a group of curious kids. What do you mean you've never had candy corn before? One boy was asking. I thought you said you were from Auckland. Sarah's heart raced as she moved towards them, but David was already there, smoothly interjecting. Oh, Max has a bit of a sweet tooth, he laughed, ruffling Max's hair. We had to limit his candy back home. But tonight's special, right, buddy? Try some. Max nodded, popping a piece of candy corn in his mouth with a forced smile. The other kids seemed satisfied, moving on to compare their candy hauls. As the party wound down, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they'd dodged a bullet. One small slip, something as innocuous as candy, could unravel everything they'd built. Walking home, Lily asleep in David's arms and Max excitedly sorting through his candy. Sarah whispered, "We can't keep doing this. We're asking too much of them." David's face was grim in the moonlight. "I know, but what choice do we have? The threat is still out there, Sarah. And it's getting closer." As if to punctuate his words, Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Kong. "Suspicious activity detected in Auckland. Stay alert. Maintain cover at all costs." Sarah's blood ran cold. Auckland, their supposed former home. Was it a coincidence, or had their enemies picked up their trail? As they approached their house, Sarah noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. The porch light, which they always left on, was off, and the front door was slightly ajar. David noticed it too, immediately tensing. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent, "take the kids to the Wilsons. Now." "David, no. Go," he hissed, already reaching for his concealed weapon. As Sarah ushered a confused Max down the street, Lily still sleeping in her arms, she looked back at their home. David was approaching cautiously, his silhouette dark against the moonlit house. Her heart pounded as she realized their fragile peace might be shattering. The past they'd tried so hard to outrun had finally caught up with them. And now, on this night of masks and make-believe, they were about to face a terror far more real than any Halloween ghost. Claire answered, her witch costume incongruous with the fear that flashed across her face when she saw Sarah's expression. "What's wrong?" "Someone's in our house," Sarah whispered urgently. "David's checking. Can you?" "Of course," Claire nodded, ushering them inside. "Kids, why don't you go to the playroom with Tom? I think he's still up." As Max led a groggy Lily upstairs, Sarah turned to Claire. "I have to go back. I can't leave David alone." Claire gripped her arm. "Sarah, wait. You can't just..." But Sarah was already moving, her maternal instinct warring with her need to protect her husband. "Keep them safe," she called over her shoulder. As she crept back towards their house, Sarah's mind raced. Who could be inside? Had the syndicate found them? Or was it just a common burglar, taking advantage of the Halloween night? She approached the darkened house, her hand reaching for the gun concealed at her back. The front door was now closed. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she noticed a faint light moving inside. Suddenly, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Sarah's combat training kicked in instantly. She drove her elbow back hard, hearing a grunt of pain, and spun to face her attacker. "Sarah, it's me," David's voice, low and urgent. Relief flooded through her, quickly replaced by confusion. "David? What's going on? Who's inside?" His face was grim in the moonlight. "It's Emily." Sarah's world tilted. "What?" But she was... "Come on," David said, leading her around to the back of the house. They peered through the kitchen window. There was Emily, still in her regular clothes, frantically rifling through drawers and cabinets. Sarah watched in horror as her daughter pulled out a folder, the one containing their emergency cash and documents. "What is she doing?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. David's jaw clenched. I think she's running away." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her daughter, her brave, angry, hurting daughter, was trying to escape. Not from a threat, but from them. From this life they'd forced her into. "We have to stop her," Sarah said, moving towards the back door. David caught her arm. "Wait. If we confront her now, we might push her away for good. We need to think this through." As they watched, Emily stuffed some clothes and the folder into a backpack. She moved to the living room, picking up a framed photo, one of the fake family photos they'd been given as part of their cover. Sarah's heart clenched as she saw Emily stare at the photo, tears streaming down her face. Then, with a determined set to her shoulders, Emily put the photo back and headed for the front door. "Now," Sarah said, her voice leaving no room for argument. They rushed to intercept Emily as she stepped onto the porch. The look of shock and then defiance on her face broke Sarah's heart. "Emily," Sarah started, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, what are you doing? What does it look like?" Emily spat, clutching her backpack. I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. David stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. Where would you go, Em? It's not safe out there. Emily laughed bitterly. Safe? Nothing about our lives is safe, Dad. At least if I leave, I can be myself. I can stop lying every single day. Sarah felt tears welling up. Oh, honey, I know this has been so hard on you, on all of us, but running away isn't the answer. Then what is? Emily cried, her composure cracking. I hate it here. I hate pretending. I hate that everything about our life is a lie. In that moment, seeing her daughter's pain laid bare, Sarah made a decision. She looked at David, saw the same realization in his eyes, and nodded. You're right, Sarah said softly. This isn't fair to any of you. So, we'll leave. Emily blinked, confusion replacing anger. What? David put his arm around Sarah. Your mother's right. We've asked too much of you kids. We'll contact Agent Kong tomorrow. See about relocating, maybe even going back home. But the danger, Emily stammered, her resolve wavering. Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug. We'll figure it out. Together. As a family. No more secrets, no more lies. As they stood there on the porch, holding each other, Sarah knew they were at a crossroads. Going back meant facing unimaginable risks. But staying meant losing their children in a different way. The sound of approaching sirens broke the moment. Someone, probably a neighbor, must have called the police after seeing the disturbance. David tensed. We need to get inside. Now! As they hurried into the house, Sarah's mind whirled with the implications of what they'd just promised. They were about to upend their lives once again, diving back into a world of danger and uncertainty. But as she looked at Emily's tear-stained but hopeful face, Sarah knew it was the right choice. They'd run from their past for long enough. Now it was time to face it, whatever the cost. The sirens grew louder, and Sarah steeled herself for the difficult conversations and decisions that lay ahead. Their future was more uncertain than ever, but for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of true